Hello, everybody. This is Catholic Dad, episode number 247, a tyrant in the family. And so I had an article. I had a video a couple days ago regarding wives. You have to be obedient to your husbands, no matter what, unless, of course, they're asking you to do intrinsically evil things. And so, and I even suggested that even if the wife and all the kids and everybody comes to you and says, "Listen, you're wrong, Dad. We're not going to follow your rule. What should you do?" And I actually suggested, well, that's the onus of being a leader in a family, and that a man has to accept that responsibility, and ultimately he has that authority to do such things. So I actually had a phone call from somebody who watched the video, and somebody who watched the video said, well, if all those people are telling you you're a tyrant, perhaps you are a tyrant. And I thought that was an interesting point. And he said, how do you know when you're a tyrant? And so I've been doing some thinking about this. Perhaps a man can become a tyrant. Perhaps a woman can become a tyrant. Perhaps family members can become a tyrant. But how do you know when there's a tyrant in the family? And so I think there's obvious ways to know that people are tyrants. I would suggest if a male, or even a female, but usually male, is physically abusive to wife or children, I would suggest that's obvious. That everybody would agree across the board in a ubiquitous way that the father's being a tyrant and he shouldn't do that. And I would agree with that as well. But how do you know if you're being a quiet tyrant, one that's not so obvious, like one that's kind of a tyrant of the family, but doesn't hit people, doesn't hurt people, doesn't act like an authoritarian ruler that other people can see, but is quietly a tyrant? And I didn't know how to answer the question, and I've been thinking about it for quite some time now. But I actually think I came to a good conclusion of this. I think those people, both wives and husbands, right, both mothers and fathers, if they're not abusive, right, then could they still be tyrants? Yeah, they obviously could be. If those said people make rules that are arbitrary, rules that make no sense, and rules that are there just to demand obedience of said wife, said husband, said children, that is an indicator that there's tyranny within the household. And I've known many large families in my life. I've known many people that have believed that the complete, utter submission to the authority of the father and the husband is absolutely paramount. I don't actually follow that line. I believe if the father needs to make decisions based upon health and safety and financial prudence, and he shouldn't step outside of those boundaries. Like if he starts making rules that aren't for the good of the health of the family, the good of the safety of the family, and the good of the financial security of the family, if he starts stepping outside of those bounds, he can actually turn into a tyrant. And I'll give you an example, by the way. In my household, I have a rule that you have to pull into the driveway, examine the entire driveway, and you actually have to back in. You actually have to back into a spot. And that actually didn't go over well with my family members for quite some time. And I said, listen, I've taken care of way too many young kids that have been hit by cars in driveways. And I'm responsible for the health and safety of this family. And therefore, I'm going to make a rule about this. When you drive in a driveway, you get to scan everything. You get to see where all the kids are. You get to see where the safe directions to drive are. And therefore, when you back in, you can actually back into your spot where you can actually see all the kids and you can actually see the driveway really well. If you pull into a spot within the driveway, like you actually pull nose in, so you don't back in, you set yourself up for when you leave that some kid's going to run out of the house, run up to the car, mommy, come after me. Mommy backs up and mommy will run over the kid. And I've taken care of, I would say, 5 children. I can't name them all, but 5 children who have been killed in the driveway by their parents or grandparents. And that's way too many. I've been practicing now for 20 years, a little over, in terms of, no, not quite. But in terms of residency training and private practice, and I've seen 5 kids, that's way too many children being killed by cars in my driveway. Now, how do I know I'm right? So we actually had a driving instructor drive up my driveway, and I have 6 cars in my driveway, but at that point in time, I think I had 5, and they're all backed in, and they're all perfectly aligned. And the guy pulls up. He's a driving instructor for like umpteen years, and he pulls up. And I say, "Hi, I'm a Catholic dad," and he shakes my hand. And he said, "I can tell there's a very responsible, mature adult living in this house." And I said, "Well, how can you tell that?" And he said, "Everybody's backed into the spots." And I said, "Well, explain that. I'm kind of curious about that." And he said, "Well, it's illegal for police officers to pull into a spot. By law, police officers have to back into a spot, because if a police officer has to leave quickly, he needs to be able to see where he's going, because if he doesn't see where he's going and he leaves quickly, he could potentially kill somebody when he pulls out of a spot. Therefore, it's by law, all police officers have to back in." And this is obviously somebody who is very responsible, teaching their family that they have to back into spots. And I'm like, well, wow, I was onto something. That was really good. Well, anyway, so I was Catholic dad, and I was making that decision, and that was a safety issue, and that's just a good safety issue. And oh, by the way, I think I was right, and to this day, I make everybody back into the spots. So how do you know if somebody's becoming a tyrant? And I think a tyranny is if you make a rule, and this goes back to my video called Nobody Tyrant. If you make a rule that has no justification behind it, that I want you to do this, and I can't tell you why, but I want you to do this, I think that's a great indicator that you're probably becoming somebody who wants to dominate your fellow human beings, somebody that wants to rule over others, somebody that wants to actually make people submit to your will, and you have no good authority to do so. So I've had friends out there with large families, and I had one father tell me one time, and he said, "Sometimes I make my kids walk up the stairs backwards." And I said, "Well, why do you do that?" And he said, "Just to see if they would do it. Because if they don't do it, then they don't believe in the authority of the Father." I think that's kind of the rule, the rule that I'm talking about. You make an arbitrary rule that has no utility of health and safety, nothing other than I'm the father and I said it and you have to do it just to test the child. I think that's probably an arbitrary rule. And if you can't justify it in terms of, less kids are going to be hit in the driveway, or it's going to make you stronger, or it's going to be, if you can't justify it, then I believe you're probably on your way to tyranny. So therefore, how do you know if you're becoming a tyrant? I've already discussed that if you're abusive physically towards your spouse or your children, you're already a tyrant, and everybody agrees with that. But if you're not that way, but you're making arbitrary rules just to see if people follow them, you probably are a tyrant. Well, anyway, just something to think about, because a lot of people have hard dynamics in their families. And if you're making arbitrary rules, then you probably are a tyrant already. And this is probably something you should meditate about, pray over. And anyway, get the Mass, pray the daily rosary, live a sacramental life, and stop being a tyrannical parent. This is Catholic Dad making you think about it. God bless you all.